Angels we have heard on high, sweetly singing o'er the plains, and the mountains in reply, echoing their joyous strains. Gloria in excelsis Deo, Gloria in excelsis Deo.
Welcome to the fifth day of CraftLit. Today, the Christmas stories we will listen to are The Snowman from 1902, Yes, Virginia from 1897, the song Angels We Have Heard on High, How to Celebrate Christmas, A Christmas Pudding, and Ruth's Christmas, and the Truce of God. If you haven't listened to the day one, the first day of CraftLit, you may want to go do that. All of the information on how and where to find other episodes will be in that opening. However, the short version is, if you're watching/listening on YouTube, you can get the playlist on our YouTube channel. And if you are looking at show notes and listening to this as an actual audio podcast, if you look in the show notes, you will see not only links to all the previous episodes, but time codes telling you where to fast wind to or rewind to be able to listen to exactly the right story that you want to listen to. Get your knitting out, get going. Time's a-ticking until those presents have to be under the tree.
Fireside Christmas Short Stories. The Snowman by Alfred B. Cooper. I've double reason, good and bad, for remembering the Christmas of 1890-something, because, while it was the most humiliating day of my life, it ended my career as a swell cracksman, and was the commencement of my better days. I'd long had my eye on Wharton Manor as a crib worth the cracking, and, as I never was the mere midnight marauder who is popularly supposed to lurk under the bed until the family is asleep, I thought the dinner hour on Christmas Eve a favourable opportunity for taking my pick of the jewel cases of Lord Wharton's guests, and for annexing the unconsidered trifles that doubtless strewed their dressing tables. I did not forget that some of the most valuable articles would at that moment be enhancing the charms of their fair owners, but, as I always worked single-handed and could not hope to carry away a van-load, I reckoned upon picking up sufficient to pay me handsomely for my trouble. Audacity is half the battle in artistic burglary. I always trusted to my wits, and, I will say this for myself, I never carried a weapon of any kind. I took the fortunes of war and considered that, if I were dolt enough to walk into a trap, or let another man's wits outwit mine, or another man's legs outrun mine, I ought to yield him the palm like a gentleman. And it was the fact that things panned out so differently from anything I could have foreseen. But that's the end of the story, and we are still at the beginning. Christmas, 1890-something, was the snowiest in my memory. It was a real Christmas card Christmas, and as I stood in the deep shadow of a yew within 40 yards of the manor, the scene pleased my artistic eye not a little. The great hall door was wide open in spite of the severity of the weather, for it was a still night, and a flood of rosy light from the crimson-covered lamps and fairy lights streamed out upon the drive. Low lights, too, burned in most of the upper windows, but as the whole house party was at dinner, they revealed no sign of life within. The drive swept round to my right as I faced the house. Having studied the geography of the neighbourhood, I knew where it was, certainly, or I should have had difficulty in locating it. A line of yew trees, similar to the one behind which I stood, was planted at intervals along the near edge of the drive, and the opposite side was bounded by a broad stone balustrade, something like the parapet of Waterloo Bridge, though not nearly so high. This stone fence was a beautiful ornament to the manor, and was admired by everybody, but, strangely enough, it was for use even more than ornament. The manor stood high, and the ground to the right fell away very suddenly into a deep dingle. This dingle was full of bracken and brambles which filled the spaces between the young trees, but the rock cropped out here and there and made it a dangerous place on a dark night. That was the reason of the stone balustrade. Farther down the drive the ravine shallowed off, and winding paths went in and out, which made it a very jolly place in the summer. When first I took my position of observation behind the yew, I got a fright. Casting my eyes towards the balustrade, I saw what I thought was a man looking directly at me. It was the hat that made the figure appear so real, yet I could have laughed aloud at my fears the next minute. It was a man indeed, but it was a man of snow, built on the coping of the balustrade in imitation of a statue. The house was full of young fellows and girls, with a fair sprinkling of small boys. Lord Wharton had no fewer than 6 of his own, and they had spent the morning, all the lot of them, setting up this effigy just for the fun of the thing. This figure could not be seen from the front door, because the sweep of the drive brought the yews into the line of sight. From where I stood, however, I could have knocked his old silk hat off with a snowball, and, such are the mad impulses of our poor human nature, I could have found it in my heart almost to have had a shy. Of course, I did no such thing, for I could see by the dishes the flunkies were carrying in that dinner was getting on, and that I was much later at my post than I had intended to be. I must bestir myself if I meant business. Business! Yes, it was my business then, I am sorry to say, and no easy business either. Yet I knew exactly what I was going to attempt and how I meant to attempt it. There was nothing original in the plan. Ivy and an open window summed it up. The back of the house would doubtless have been safer, but then my booty was in front, and at such an hour it would have been 10 times more risky to traverse the house from back to front than to go boldly in at an upper front window. Behold me, then, 10 minutes later, stealthily peering into a dimly lighted room most luxuriously furnished. I had experienced more difficulty than usual, for I was as nimble as a cat, in negotiating the ivy, because I wore a long, lightish-coloured overcoat, made necessary by my tendency to rheumatism. Only a couple of candles in candlesticks of beaten silver served to light the room, but I could see the gleam of jewels and rich ornaments on the dressing-table, half hidden by a heavy curtain which hung from a sort of carved oaken bracket branching from the wall. I stepped inside upon the thick pile of the carpet and stole noiselessly towards the glittering table. The next moment you might have knocked me down with a feather. Behind the curtain, quickly pocketing the smallest and most valuable objects he could see, was a man in evening dress. A big man, half as big again as myself, but with Gentleman's Valley written all over him. We were not 4 feet apart, and the gasp of astonishment I gave was enough to make him nearly jump out of his skin. His dismay was only momentary. He knew the next instant what I was there for, and was evidently as quick-witted as I, for, before I could say peas, he had darted between the wall and the curtain, banged the window into its place, and yelled, "Thieves! Thieves! Thieves!" a truer plural than anyone imagined, at the very top of his voice. For the wink of an eyelid I meant to tackle him, but what was the use? Moments were mighty precious just then, and even while he was shouting, the sly wretch, I turned and bolted for the door, intending to make a dash through the camp of the enemy and trust to my heels to get clear away. As bad luck would have it, as I turned the bend of the stairs that brought me in full view of the brilliantly lighted hall, I ran full tilt against a big flunkey with a tray of wine-glasses. Talk about a shindy! A gas explosion would scarcely have made more noise. Broken glass, clattering tray, and the bumpety-bump of 2 heavy bodies falling downstairs was something to remember. I fell uppermost, and giving myself a bounce up, With a prod below the belt which knocked the remaining wind out of the footman, I made for the door again as if a legion had been behind me. Nor was it mere fancy, for in truth a legion was behind me. The valet's big voice must have penetrated to the dining room, and the tremendous clatter of the footman and my luckless self caused by the downfall brought the party out like a swarm of bees. "Thieves!" came like a thunderclap from the top of the stairs. The valet was playing the game to perfection. I had 30 yards start, but I knew that among the guests would be many a young athlete from the varsities, men who could do their 100 in even time, soccer and rugger men who were accustomed to rough and tumble, so my chances of getting clear away were none too rosy. Besides, the whole party were lighter shod and clad than I, and I knew that these young fellows, though in no rig for snow, would not care a straw about ruining their dress shoes. I got round the sweep of the drive and was in the straight. It was 300 yards to the great gate, and cover, except the yews, was scarce. A gleam of lanterns ahead decided me. My way was blocked. Meanwhile my wits had been working at express speed. It was snowing again in heavy flakes. I purposely fell headlong into the snow piled on the edge of the drive, rolled over and over, and clutched an armful of it to my body and shoulders. I then scrambled up, leapt upon the stone balustrade, snatched the old silk hat, all snow-covered, from the head of the snowman, gave that unfortunate effigy a shove which toppled it neck and crop into the depths of the dingle, and myself dropped upon my knees on the top of the snowy foundation it had left behind it. It was the work of 5 seconds at the most, and there was I, with the snow-crowned hat over my eyes, my overcoat thickly caked with snow, and my legs wholly invisible, posing in the room and stead of the man of snow. The hue and cry went past me like a whirlwind, half a dozen flunkies in their knee-breeches and yellow stockings bringing up the rear. They ran full speed 30 yards past my post of observation into a band of waits with lanterns and instruments from the village. These yokels were ready to turn and fly themselves when they saw the strange exodus from the manor, thinking, no doubt, that all the ghosts of which the old house was well known to be the trysting place had suddenly appeared, not in singles but in battalions, and scared the guests away from their dinner and out of their 5 senses. But the sudden halt didn't help me in the least. The dilemma was distinctly mutual, and I did not bless the waits one little bit. Had the thief gone down the drive, they would surely have seen him. It was a perfect mystery how he could possibly have dodged them. He had been seen in full flight round the bend. He must either have gone over into the dingle, a most unlikely course if he knew what he was doing, or he was hiding behind the yews. Then commenced a game of hide-and-seek. I nearly burst with laughter as I saw this mixed company dodge in and out among the sombre trees and catch at each other convulsively, each thinking the other a burglar. But there was no opportune opening for me. All I could do was to kneel stock still. One of the waits pointed me out. His attitude showed terror, though I could not see his face. The laugh that greeted his find sent him behind a yew tree on a fresh trail and very greatly reassured me. I evidently looked my part. Just then there was another arrival, the local policeman, and a big man in plain clothes, whom I guessed was a tech. Lord Wharton and some of the guests were in a group near me when they came along, and I heard the whole colloquy. Their arrival at that moment was quite unconnected with my affair, but it seemed to fit into the circumstances as detailed by his lordship in a few sentences. I heard the tech say, "He's a very old hand, known commonly as Toff Smith, but his real name is Charles Markland. He's wanted for a dozen big jobs, and I've had almost certain advice that he's somewhere in this neighbourhood." "It'll be he," said his lordship, "but he has been baulked this time." Lieutenant Fontenoy's valet was too quick for him. He has got away in the most amazing fashion, but it's a comfort to know that he has gone empty-handed. I'd heard of Toff Smith. He was one of the bigwigs of the profession, a perfect Napoleon of burglary, but it goes without saying I was not he. So I was now not only personating a snowman, but involuntarily standing in the shoes of Toff Smith as well. "He's got clear away," one cried. "Why trouble further? James tells me he did not have time to pick up a pin. Let us have a lark while we're out." I guessed it was Lieutenant Fontenoy who spoke, and all the youngsters, who had enjoyed the whole thing immensely, set up a shout, for he had evidently suggested something. "Cockshies! Pay your penny and take your chance. Now then, fair and square. No, don't cross the drive. Who'll knock his hat off first? Take your choice, coconut or cigar. I'm frozen to death. It'll warm us up." These were the cries I heard, but I didn't at the first blush tumble to their meaning. The ladies, clad in thick wraps, were at the windows all this time, where they could look along the drive and get news of the search. Now I heard them laugh merrily as a small boy ran across and made some communication to them. I quickly learned what it was. They were to witness a bombardment. The whole band, guests and waits, the police had hurried off, were gathered together about 20 yards from where I knelt, and at the word of command they let fly. I have enjoyed snowboarding in my time, but that was when I had a chance of potting my opponent in the nape of the neck when he was stooping for ammunition. But to be the sole target for 30 well-directed missiles per second is another story. Move I dared not. I must grin and bear it, or, failing that, bear it without grinning. I had jammed the beastly old hat too tightly over my cranium for it to be easily dislodged, and the fun, in consequence, waxed fast and furious. By degrees discipline broke down, and the set distance was no longer regarded. Snowballs innumerable came at me from a range of a few yards with terrific force. Recognition was quickly put out of the question, for had I been a veritable snowman I could not have looked more like one. Every snowball that hit, and few, indeed, missed, left its contribution to my make-up, and I was shortly in peril of suffocation from the accumulation of snow about my mouth and nostrils, and almost equally in danger of temporary blindness, but that the hat rim protected me enough, at least, to keep half an eye intact. Had not the top of the wall been broad and I on my knees, I must inevitably have gone over willy-nilly, but hitherto I had kept my place, and I meant to continue to do so, for the fall backwards had greater terrors for me even than remaining where I was. But now the clapping of fair hands, the exhilarating exercise, the excitement of the last 20 minutes, and the spirit of mad revel which enters into the hearts of all men occasionally, wrought my doom. The waits, as aforementioned, had been pressed into the fray. It was Christmas time, and class distinctions went by the board. Even the man who played the big bass viol had propped his instrument against a tree and joined in the sport. But now, like me, they were to be sorry they had come. Half a dozen young sparks, to vary the amusement, seized the big bass fiddle, and the youngsters fought for clarinet, hautboy, ovieclide, euphonium, and trombone. Then, to the sound of a wild, unearthly pibroch, they levelled the bass fiddle like a battering ram and charged for the supposed snowman with shouts of laughter, thinking to demolish it finally and end the sport. I saw it coming, and I knew that the bottom end of a bass fiddle has an ugly spike, which might put an end to my career more surely than the dingle. I never waited for the shock. I went down without a touch, and, rolling over and over down the steep bank, I only remember thinking I should never stop, and, then, nothing. How I got to Everledge, a small town 5 miles away, I never rightly knew. I came to myself in the dingle while it was still dark, with pains in every limb. The nurse at the cottage hospital, bless her, tells me that I was picked up in an apparently dying state, and everybody sympathized with my being lost in the snow. I never told her the truth. How could I, when she was so kind and good? But if she had guessed why I was so interested in the district weekly paper, she might have suspected something. Here is the conclusion of the paragraph which took my eye. This is one of the most cunning robberies on record. The detectives think the whole affair was a put-up job on the part of Toff Smith, Lieutenant Fontenoy's valet, who left a most impudent note behind him, for while the party were all disporting themselves with the snowman, or applauding from the windows, he got clear away with £3,000 worth of jewellery. End of The Snowman by Alfred B. Cooper.
Is there a Santa Claus? From the editorial page of the New York Sun, September 21, 1897. We take pleasure in answering thus prominently the communication below, expressing at the same time our great gratification that its faithful author is numbered among the friends of the Sun.
Dear Editor, I am 8 years old. Some of my little friends say there is no Santa Claus. Papa says if you see it in the sun, it's so. Please tell me the truth. Is there a Santa Claus? Virginia O'Hanlon, 115 West 95th Street.
Virginia, your little friends are wrong. They have been affected by the skepticism of a skeptical age. They do not believe except they see. They think that nothing can be which is not comprehensible by their little minds. All minds, Virginia, whether they be men's or children's, are little. In this great universe of ours, man is a mere insect, an ant, in his intellect as compared with the boundless world about him, as measured by the intelligence capable of grasping the whole of truth and knowledge. Yes, Virginia, there is a Santa Claus. He exists as certainly as love and generosity and devotion exist, and you know that they abound and give to your life its highest beauty and joy. Alas, how dreary would be the world if there were no Santa Claus! It would be as dreary as if there were no Virginias. There would be no childlike faith then, no romance to make tolerable this existence. We should have no enjoyment except in sense and sight. The eternal light with which childhood fills the world would be extinguished. Not believe in Santa Claus? You might as well not believe in fairies. You might get your papa to hire men to watch in all the chimneys on Christmas Eve to catch Santa Claus. But even if you do not see Santa Claus coming down, what would that prove? Nobody sees Santa Claus, but that is no sign that there is no Santa Claus. The most real things in the world are those that neither children nor men can see. Did you ever see fairies dancing on the lawn? Of course not, but that's no proof that they are not there. Nobody can conceive or imagine all the wonders there are unseen and unseeable in the world. You tear apart the baby's rattle and see what makes the noise inside, but there is a veil covering the unseen world which not the strongest man, nor even the united strength of all the strongest men that ever lived, could tear apart. Only faith, fancy, poetry, love, romance can push aside that curtain and view and picture the supernal beauty and glory beyond. Is it all real? Ah, Virginia, in all this world there is nothing else real and abiding. No Santa Claus? Thank God he lives, and he lives forever. 1,000 years from now, Virginia, nay, 10 times 10,000 years from now, he will continue to make glad the heart of childhood.
If you have a book lover or bibliophile in your life, then consider gifting them a premium membership. Our premium membership gives you access to book parties, watch parties, Discord access, and all our premium books, our premium audio, and occasionally video content, all for an entire year. Go to craftlit.gumroad.com. That's CRAFT as in Tom, LIT .gumroad, GUM as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com, and give someone a premium membership, or go to craftlit.com/premium to get the membership for yourself. How to celebrate Christmas. Suggestions for Mothers and Kindergartners by Elizabeth Harrison. All festival occasions, when rightly used, have a unifying effect upon the family, neighborhood, Sunday school, church, state, or nation, in that they direct all minds for the time being away from self and in one direction, toward one central thought. The family festivals are an enormous power in the hands of the mother who knows how to use them aright. By means of the birthday anniversaries, 4th of July, Thanksgiving, and above all Christmas, she can direct her children's activities into channels of unselfish endeavor. Of all the festivals of the year, the Christmas festival is perhaps the least understood. That is, if one is to judge by the manner in which the day is generally observed. Why do we celebrate Christmas? What are we celebrating? Is it not the greatest manifestation of love, unselfish love, that has ever been revealed to man? And how, as a rule, are children taught to observe it? Usually, by expecting an undue amount of attention, an unlimited amount of injudicious feeding, and a selfish exaction of unneeded presence. Thus, egotism, greed, and selfishness are fostered where love, generosity, and self-denial should be exercised. The Christmas season is the season in which the joy of giving should be so much greater than that of receiving, that the child, through his own experiences, is prepared somewhat to comprehend the great truth. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. For weeks beforehand, the mother can lay her plans by means of which each child in the family may be led to make something, or may do without something, or may earn money for the purchase of something, which is to add to his Christmas joy by enabling him to give to those he loves, and also to some less fortunate child who, but for his thoughtfulness, would be without any Christmas cheer. In this endeavor, of course, the mother must join with heart and soul, else the giving is liable to become a mere formal fulfillment of a taxing obligation. Little children, when rightly dealt with, enjoy putting themselves into the preparations with which they are to surprise and please others fully as much, if not more, than they enjoy receiving presents. So near as yet are they to the hand of God that unselfish love is an easy thing to inculcate. Let me contrast two preparations for Christmas which have passed under my own eye. In the first case, I chanced to be in one of those crowded toy shops where the hurried, tired women are trying to fill out their lists of supposed obligations for the Christmas season. All was confusion and haste, impatience, and more or less ill humor. My attention was directed towards a handsomely dressed mother, leading by the hand an overdressed little girl of about 8 years of age. The tones of the woman's voice struck like a discord through my soul. "Come on," she said petulantly to the child who had stopped for a moment to admire some new toy. "Come on. We have to give her something, and we may as well buy her a couple of dolls. They'll all be broken to pieces in 3 weeks' time, but that's no matter to us. Come on, I've no time to wait." This last was accompanied by an impatient jerk of the loitering child's arm. Thus, what should have been the joy of Christmas giving was made to that child a disagreeable, unwilling, and useless expenditure of money. What part of the real Christmas spirit, the God spirit, which so loved the world, could possibly come to a child from such a preparation for Christmas as this? Nor is it an unusual occurrence. Go into any of our large stores and shops just before Christmas, and you will see scores of women checking off their lists in a way which shows the relief of having one more present settled. All the great, true, and beautiful spirit of Christmas joy is gone, and a mere commercial transaction, oftentimes a vulgar display of wealth, has taken its place. On the other hand, go with me into one of our quiet kindergartens, where the sunshine without is rivaled by the sunshine within. See the white-aproned teacher seat herself and gather around her the group of eager children. Listen to the tones of her voice when she says, "Oh, children, children, you don't know what a happy time I am going to let you have this Christmas. Just guess what we are going to do to make this the gladdest, brightest, happiest Christmas that ever was." Look into the eager little faces anticipating a new joy, knowing from past experience that the joy means effort, endeavor, self-control, and self-denial. Nevertheless, that it means happiness too. Listen to the eager questions and plans of the children. Some of them, alas, are showing their past training in selfishness by their, "You're going to give each of us a present?" or "You're going to have a party?" Then hear her gleeful answer, "No, guess again, it is better than that, better even than that." Then after a pause, during which expectation stands on tiptoe, "I am going to let each one of you be a little Santa Claus. We are going to make not only Mama and Papa happy, but also some dear little child who might not have a happy Christmas unless we gave one to him." Listen, as I have listened to the clapping of hands after such an announcement. Look at the light which comes into the eyes. Notice the eager look of interest upon each childish face as all seat themselves at the work table, and the plan of work is more definitely laid out. Go as I have gone, morning after morning, and see these same children working patiently, earnestly, and continuously upon the little gifts which are to make Christmas happier for someone else. Will you then need to ask the question as to which is the truer way of celebrating the holy Christmas time? Not that I would have any mother deprived of the pleasure of giving to her children, any more than I would have her children robbed of their pleasure of giving to others. Let us be careful that our gifts are not gifts of useless profusion, of such articles as cultivate self-indulgence, vanity, or indolence. Gifts for children should be few and simple, such as are suggestive and will aid them in the future drawing out of their own inner thoughts or ideals. Above all, let the joy of having given of his best to someone else be the chief thought of the glad Christmas time.
A Christmas Pudding by Charles Knight. Mr. Oldknow had been romping with his children on Christmas Eve. At last they had gone to bed with flushed faces and disordered curls, and the drawing-room was deserted. Mrs. Oldknow, a careful matron, looked thoughtful as she saw that the pride of the sponge cake was utterly fallen, and that unquestionably another must be procured for the next day's festival. Mr. Oldknow, on hospitable thoughts intent, half soliloquizing, said, "My dear, we must have a second pudding to-morrow." "Indeed, how is it to be made?" replied the lady. "How made? Why, of course with plums and flour and plenty of brandy." "Oh, you are a precious cook," said Mrs. Oldknow. "You think a Christmas pudding can be made as easily as a pancake, do you? Why, our pudding is made already. Come into the kitchen. The cook is gone to bed, and I will show it you." The kitchen mantel was radiant with the brightness of brass candlesticks that were never used but were duly cleaned. Pewter water plates also for ornament gleamed over the dresser. An ancient clock, something too big for the corner in which he stood, stretched up from the floor to the ceiling, with the crown of his respectable old head pressed against its whitewashed surface, and his vigorous pendulum passing and repassing behind its own peculiar little window, like a sentry always on guard. A walnut-tree bureau was still smart, in another and larger recess, under the polishing of half a century. Mr. Oldknow sighed as he recollected that, in his father's time, he had often taken his frugal meals in that kitchen. And now, when the family home had acknowledged him as master for 20 years, the refinement of our days had banished him from a room where his father used to sit in patriarchal dignity. There was the identical armchair, the fine old high-backed chair, which to his boyish imagination was a king's throne. Mrs. Oldknow took out her family receipt book from the polished bureau, and then read aloud for her husband's edification £1 Christmas pudding, £1 raisins, £1 currants, £1 suet, £1 breadcrumbs, £1/4 orange peel, 2 ounces citron peel, 2 ounces lemon peel, 1 nutmeg, 1 teaspoonful powdered ginger, 1 teaspoonful powdered cinnamon, 1 wineglassful brandy, 7 eggs, 1 teaspoonful salt, £1/4 raw sugar, milk enough to liquefy the mass if the eggs and brandy be not sufficient for this purpose. "And why, my love, can't we have £2 Christmas puddings, or 4 half-pound puddings?" said Mr. Oldknow. "I want the Porters to have a pudding, and old Nurse Franklin, and the Corderies. Fruit is cheap, and why not?" "My dear Oldknow, they always do have a pudding, every one of them. Look here." Mrs. Oldknow then lifted a cloth off a vast earthen pan, and behold, a rich semi-liquefied mass, speckled throughout with plums and currants, presented itself to her husband's view. He was content. He learned that at the peep of dawn the copper fire would be lighted, and the fruity treasure would be divided into several portions, the mightiest of which would be for the home table, and the others for the Porters and the Franklins and the Corderies. "My love," said the contented Mr. Oldknow, "as I am in the old kitchen for the first time these dozen years, I think I'll light a cigar, for there is a fire, I see, in this new-fashioned cooking range, and rest for a quarter of an hour after all the polking and blind man's buff we have had." And so Mrs. Oldknow went to bed. Now, Mr. Oldknow was a great reader of travels, ancient and modern, a kind of social antiquarian also. He read the Travellers partly for commercial information and general views of life, and partly with an imaginative taste for unfamiliar scenes. The moving panoramas, the Niles and Mississippis and overland routes, had given a new intensity to these studies. The vast pudding dish was before him, and he mused and mused over the mercantile history of the various substances of which that pudding was composed. The light wreath of the cigar crept round the old kitchen, forming fantastic shapes before it melted in the dim distance. More and more obscure became the well-remembered room, as Oldknow sent forth feebler and feebler puffs from the weed. Its dying fragrance mingled with thoughts of nutmeg and cinnamon, and became Sabaean odours from the spicy shore of Araby the Blessed. The walls of the kitchen then gradually expanded. The bright pewter plates became mirrors in which landscapes of every clime were reflected. At length all the other mirrors were absorbed by one central mirror of vast proportions, upon whose vivid pictures the contemplative Mr. Oldknow long gazed with a blissful serenity. And first the shores of Malaga floated before his vision. Groves of orange trees clustered around secluded convents. The sugar-cane and the cotton plant covered the plains. Vineyards creeping up the bright mountain slopes basked in the autumnal sun, and their ponderous fruitage grew browner and browner as the white or red skin of the delicious muscat shrivelled in the noontide heat. Ruins of Moorish towers and mosques were studied amidst whitewashed houses, and the brilliant columns of the Alhambra glittered as in mockery amidst its fallen roofs. By the side of the tributaries of the Guadalquivir, the Carmenes, the vineyard gardens of the Arabs, formed enchanting walks, And as our book traveller heard the night breeze laden with 1,000 perfumes whispering amidst the orange groves, an articulate sound gradually dropped upon his ear, and he saw the genius of the raisin, with the fresh vine wreath of a Greek bacchante on the head and the cashmere shawl of an Arabian sultana round the waist. "Son of a vineless land," said the form, "behold how I labour for thee. I gather the sunbeams in my hand, and range over the salt wave of the Mediterranean to scatter ripeness wherever the vineyards bow beneath the pulpy clusters which are too rich for the winepress. Your ships throng my Andalusian ports of Malaga and Valencia, ranging onward to the eastern Chesme, and they bear to your cold and cloudy land the richest gifts of our sunny south. Why come ye every year more and more with your linens and your woolens, your glass and your pottery to exchange with our native fruit? Why strip ye the gardens which the faithful planted of the grapes which ought to be reserved for the unfermented wine which the prophet delighted to drink?" "Immortal child of the Arab," replied the son of the vineless land, "your nation gave us the best element of commerce when you gave us your numerals. Your learning and your poetry, your science and your industry no longer fructify in heaven-favoured Andalusia. The sun which ripens your grapes and your oranges makes the people lazy and the priests rapacious. We come to your ports with the products of our looms and our furnaces, and we induce a taste for comforts that will become a habit. When our glass and our porcelain shall find its way into your peasant's hut, then will your olives be better tended, and your grapes more carefully dried. Man only worthily labours when he labours for exchange with other labour. Behold that pudding. It is our England's annual luxury. It is the emblem of our commercial eminence. The artisan of Birmingham and Manchester, the seaman of London and Liverpool, whose festive board will be made joyous tomorrow with that national dish, has contributed by his labour to make the raisins of Malaga and the currants of Zante, the oranges of Algarve, the cinnamon of Ceylon, and the nutmegs of the Moluccas of commercial value, and he has thus called them into existence as effectually as the labour of the native cultivator. Child of the Arab civilizer, be grateful." Mr. Oldknow looked for an approving answer, but the genius of the raisin had fled. The hillsides of Andalusia rapidly change into the great plain of Zante. No longer is it the woody Zacynthus of Homer, but a land of olives and vines. There lies the flower of the Levant before our home traveller, with its gardens of pomegranates and peaches and oranges and melons, and its fields of vines and currants. The genius of the currant arose, a diminutive figure, winged like the Pegasus of Corinth, and having the rose of England entwined with the olive leaf amongst his hair. The genius smiled upon the listener. "Welcome is your Christmas," said he, "to Zante and Cephalonia. We have 12,000 acres of our little grapes under culture for your festivities, and your ships have this year carried off our 50 million pounds of currants for your puddings and your cakes. Welcome are ye with your sugar and your coffee, your rice and your cheese. Welcome are ye with your gold. Our corn crops are gone, and without ye the Maria would not yield us the wheat and the maize which we shall need till the next harvest. It is better to grow currants in the soil which they delight in, and buy our wheat, than plough up our little vines for a bread-producing crop. We are sure of our bread for our currants, whilst England demands plum puddings, as England is sure of her puddings whilst she weaves calico and forges steel. So a happy Christmas to you, and good night." "The same to you, and bravo, my little free trader," cried Mr. Oldknow to the genius of the current. An English scene. It is harvest time all over the wide chalk fields of Kent. Wherever the eye can stretch inland, the golden corn is bending under the sea breeze, or the sheaves are patiently waiting for the coming wagon. On every side a visible plenty smiles upon the traveller. The genius of bread arises. He is a stalwart figure in a white smock frock. From his straw hat to his laced boots, all is tight and trim about him. He is slow of speech, but he ever and anon mutters the word protection. "Protection!" exclaimed Mr. Oldknow. "Who taught you that song? Do you want protection against cheap bread, my friend? Against warm and clean clothing? Against a sound roof with glazed windows? Against a coal fire? Against your tea, your sugar, your butter, your cheese, your bacon, and your Christmas pudding? What are you thinking of? Anything? Call up the ghost of your grandfather, show him your wheaten bread, and ask him to compare it with his black loaf of rye. You have small wages, it is true, but your wages do not depend upon the cheapness of your produce. Your real wages are as great as you ever got in the protection days, and they go twice as far. You stand up now as a man, instead of breaking stones upon the road at the bidding of the parish. Leave the beer shop, cultivate your garden, have a pig in the sty, send your children to school, and believe me, you will be better off than any other labourer of Europe." Mr. Oldknow was excited, but he was fairly angry when the genius of Suet presented himself in the guise of a Smithfield drover, with an overdriven ox falling upon his knees in a crowded street as if imploring for rest. Mr. Oldknow groaned, and was wicked enough to wish that the drover's dog was scattering the court of aldermen. The Banda Islands now filled the scene. Grouped in the Indian archipelago, they reared their volcanic peaks abruptly from the ocean, their mountain-sides clothed with timber trees, and the sago palms yielding sustenance to the people of the plains. In the covert of the forest trees sat the brilliant birds of paradise, occasional visitants, but the great feature of the landscape was contributed by the nutmeg trees. It is the gathering time. The Bandanese, mingled with their Dutch masters, are plucking the peach-like fruit from their shelter of green and grey leaves. The ripe fruit has split in half as it hangs on the tree, and there is the kernel surrounded by the mace. But the precious nutmeg has a second protection, its shell. The mace is removed, the kernel is dried in the sun, the shell splits, and there is the nutmeg of commerce. The genius of the nutmeg appeared. He was a fantastic figure, half man, half bird, a Dutchman's head on a wood-pigeon's body. "Englishman," said he, "you have wrestled with me for the Spice Islands, but they are mine. You have taken from me the cinnamon groves of Ceylon. They are yours. In the sea traditions of your country you have the Flying Dutchman. I am he. We of the Zuyder Zee built up our commerce upon restrictions and monopolies. When we drove the Portuguese from the archipelago, we rooted up all the clove trees but those of Amboina, and all the nutmeg trees but those of Banda. We limited the world to a fixed quantity of cloves and nutmegs, as we limited also the commerce of cinnamon. Rather than fill the market and lower the price, we have thrown our nutmegs into the deep and made a bonfire of our cinnamon in the streets of Amsterdam. When in the Indian seas, in the dim twilight or under the hazy moon, a figure has been seen flying along the still waters in which the keel left no furrow, I was that navigator. I was pursuing the wood-pigeon, who defied all the rigours of my unsocial laws, and carried the nutmeg seed to lands which owed Holland no tribute. I have given up the contest against nature. My spice monopoly was ruinous to myself and injurious to my colonists. In Ceylon I saw your English diffusing comfort and equal laws, opening roads, encouraging industry, destroying forced labour, and selling cinnamon to all the world. I have made an alliance with the wood-pigeon. I have planted the nutmeg in Java, and there will I contest with you the commerce of cinnamon. I have learnt that a small demand at high prices for any useful commodity is neither so safe nor so profitable as a large demand at moderate prices. I have learnt further that the end of commerce is not to make individuals rich and support public expenditure by heavy duties, but to diffuse all the productions of nature and art amongst all the inhabitants of the globe. You have taught me a lesson. The old trade of the United Provinces has died under monopolies and restrictions. We may once more be your honest rivals under a wiser code. You want £200,000 weight of nutmegs yearly? We will deal like merchant princes, and good men and true. Agreed, said Mr. Oldknow. A West Indian sugar plantation is now mirrored, with its canes ripening under a tropical sun, and its mills with their machinery of cylinders and boilers. The genius of sugar is a freed Negro. It was said that in freedom he would not work. He has vindicated his privileges in his industry and his obedience. The grand experiment has succeeded in all moral effects. But the nation that demanded cheap corn would not be content with dear sugar. We must buy our sugar wherever the cane ripens. We use 700 millions of pounds of sugar annually, which yield a duty of 4 millions sterling. Mr. Oldknow thought this, but was silent when he saw the Negro sitting under his own fig tree, for the political questions which his freedom involved were somewhat complicated. He would trust to the ultimate power of a noble example, and in the meantime rejoice that the great body of the British people could buy their sugar at half the price that their fathers paid. Mr. Oldknow, being somewhat at fault upon the sugar question, grew confused as new forms flitted before him. The solitary egg-collector of Cork was there, in her blue cloak and her kish on her back. Her step was brisker than in the famine years, and her light grey eye was once more laughing under her long black eyelashes. She had walked from cottage to cottage some 20 miles, and her kish was to form part of the many hundred egg crates that England required for her Christmas puddings. May the daughters and sons of Erin, soliloquized Mr. Oldknow, never again suffer as they have suffered. May plenty smile upon their fields and comfort in their cottages. May they have just masters and wise rulers. May they rely upon industry and not upon agitation. May they— The blue cloak was gone. A figure started up, half gnome, half nereid. Mr. Oldknow was thinking of his evening gambols of yes and no, so with half-consciousness he asked, "Animal kingdom?" "No." "Vegetable?" "No." "Mineral?" "Yes." "In England?" "Yes." "Here," continued the figure, "I am free. I fly through the land, scattering blessings as widely as the dews of heaven. I bring my treasures out of the bowels of the earth and from the depths of the sea. I make the fields fruitful. I forbid your food to perish. Without me, the sustenance of man and beast is imperfect. The herds of unfathomable forests wander to the plains in search of me. The child that loves me not loses the bloom of its cheek and the odour of its breath. I am the universal friend, and yet kings have impiously dared to deny me to their subjects, even though they should perish. Their crimes have been punished. Even now, the Hindu, whom you have benefited in so many things, is deprived of me by your fiscal injustice. Learn to be wiser. You have freed me from the burdens of your home taxation, and your industrial wealth is quadrupled. I am... Salt, guessed Mr. Oldknow. To Salt succeeded a singular figure as the milky genius. It seemed one half dairywoman with her pail and stool, decently clad in woolen petticoat and black stockings, but above was a naiad of the Thames with dripping locks held loosely together with a wreath of rushes. Mr. Oldknow was about to harangue when a brisk power-loom weaver stepped forth with pudding-cloth in hand. "The water boils," said he. "The ingredients are mixed. Be it mine to bind them together." "Right," cried Mr. Oldknow, "again our country's emblem. The bundle of sticks and the pudding-cloth have each the same moral. Our ancestors in their civil dudgeon made plum porridge. We, in our united interests, well bound together, produce Christmas pudding." There was a silence and a pause. Mr. Oldknow peered out. The mirror had lost its brilliancy, but suddenly the great pudding bowl expanded into a mighty flat dish. The pudding swelled into an enormous globe, black with plums and odorous with streaming sauce. A holly tree with its prickly leaves at bottom, its smooth leaves on high, and its bright red berries grew up under a crystal dome. On the edge of the dish were grouped the Andalusian with the cashmere shawl, the Ionian islander with the wings of Corinth, the Kentish ploughman in the smock frock, the Flying Dutchman, the Negro without the chains, the Irish market woman, the gnome Nereid, the London naiad, and the weaver with the cloth. And they all took hands and thrice danced round the edge of the dish. And lo! Out of the holly tree dropped a moustached denizen of the Palais Royal. He had a flask of brandy in one hand and a huge silver bowl in the other. "O nation of anti-chemical cooks," he cried, "you put the cognac into the pudding, and 9 hours boiling drives off all the spirit into unprofitable gas. Look at me. It is the genius of our nation to flare up." With that, he emptied the flask into the bowl and set it on fire, and poured it over the pudding. And the makers of the pudding again danced round it in the blue flame, and the pudding was nothing hurt by the flare-up, but remained as sound and unscathed as the land itself after a month's polemical fire. And then Mr. Oldknow volunteered a song, of which 4 lines remained in his memory, for he had learnt it as a child when England was threatened with invasion. Britain to peaceful arts inclined, where commerce opens all her stores, in social bands shall league mankind, and join the sea-divided shores. Mr. Oldknow opened his eyes. The kitchen was in darkness, and his cigar smoked out. "Bless my heart," said he, "the waits are playing the wooden walls, and the clock strikes 2.
If you have a book lover in your life, or even someone who's neurodivergent or obsessed with the Wicked musical, come check out our Gumroad shop. We have annotated classics, a neurodivergent planner, and even 9+ hours of The Wizard of Oz as an annotated audiobook. You can find them all on craftlit.gumroad.com. That's craftlit, craftlit.gumroad, Gum as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com. Or you could buy them as a gift. Happy holidays, and take care of yourself, your friends, and your family.
The Truce of God by Mary Roberts Reinhardt. 1. Now the day of the birth of our Lord dawned that year grey and dreary, and a Saturday. But, despite the weather, in the town at the foot of the hill there was rejoicing, as befitted so great a festival. The day before a fat steer had been driven to the public square, and there dressed and trussed for the roasting. The light of morning falling on his carcass revealed around it great heaps of fruits and vegetables, for the year had been prosperous. But the young overlord sulked in his castle at the cliff top, and bit his nails. From Thursday evening of each week to the morning of Monday, Mother Church had decreed peace, a truce of God. 3 full days out of each week his men-at-arms polished their weapons and grew fat. 3 full days out of each week his grudge against his cousin, Philip of the Black Beard, must feed on itself. His dark mood irritated the Bishop of Tours, who had come to speak of certain scandalous things which had come to his ears. Charles heard him through. "She took refuge with him," he said violently, when the bishop had finished. "She knew what hate there was between us, yet she took refuge with him." "The question is," said the bishop mildly, "why she should have been driven to refuge. A gentle lady, a faithful wife." "Deus!" The young seigneur clapped his fist on the table. "You know well the reason. A barren woman." "She had borne you a daughter." But Charles was far gone in rage and out of hand. The bishop took his offended ears to bed, and left him to sit alone by the dying fire, with bitterness for company. Came into the courtyard at midnight the Christmas singers from the town, the blacksmith rolling a great bass, the crockery seller who sang falsetto, and a fool of the village who had slept overnight in a manger on the Holy Eve a year before, and had brought from it not wit, but a voice from heaven, a miracle of miracles. The men-at-arms in the courtyard stood back to give them space. They sang with eyes upturned, with full-throated vigour, albeit a bit warily, with an anxious glance now and then toward those windows beyond which the young lord sulked by the fire. The light of light divine, true brightness undefiled, he bears for us the shame of sin, a holy, spotless child. They sang to the frosty air. When neither money nor burning faggot was flung from the window they watched, they took their departure, relieved if unrewarded. In former years the lady of the castle had thrown them alms, but times had changed. Now the gentle lady was gone, and the seigneur sulked in the hall. With the dawn Charles the Fair took himself to bed, and to him, pattering barefoot along stone floors, came Clotilda, the child of his disappointment. "Are you asleep?" One arm under his head, he looked at her without answer. "It is the anniversary of the birth of our Lord," she ventured. "Today he is born. I thought—" She put out a very small, cold hand, but he turned his head away. "Back to your bed," he said shortly. "Where is your nurse, to permit this?" The child's face fell. Something she had expected, some miracle, perhaps, a softening of the Lord her Father, so that she might ask of him a Christmas boon. The bishop had said that Christmas miracles were often wrought, and she herself knew that this was true. Had not the fool secured his voice, so that he who had been but lightly held became the village troubadour, and slept warm and full at night? She had gone to the bishop with this the night before. "If I should lie in a manger all night," she said, standing with her feet well apart and looking up at him, "would I become a boy?" The bishop tugged at his beard. "A boy, little maid? Would you give up your blue eyes and your soft skin to be a roystering lad?" "My father wishes for a son," she had replied, and the cloud that was over the castle shadowed the bishop's eyes. "It would not be well," he replied, "to tamper with the works of the Almighty. Pray rather for this miracle, that your father's heart be turned toward you and toward the lady, your mother. So during much of the night she had asked this boon steadfastly, but clearly she had not been heard. Back to your bed, said her father, and turned his face away. She went as far as a leather curtain which hung in the doorway, and there she turned. Why do they sing? She had asked the bishop, of the blacksmith and the others, and he had replied into his beard, to soften the heart of heart. So she turned in the doorway and sang in her reedy little voice, much thinned by the cold, sang to soften her young father's heart. To the light of light divine, true brightness undefiled, he bears for us the shame of sin, a holy, spotless child. But the song failed. Perhaps it was the wrong hour, or perhaps it was because she had not slept in the manger and brought forth the gift of voice. Blood of the martyrs, shouted her father, and raised himself on his elbow. Are you mad? Get back to your bed. I shall have a word with someone for this. Whether it had softened him or not, it had stirred him, so she made her plea. It is his birthday. I want to see my mother. Then she ducked under the curtain and ran as fast as she could back to where she belonged. Terror winged her feet. She had spoken a forbidden word. All sleep was gone from Charles the Fair. He lay on his elbow in his bed and thought of things that he wished to forget. Of the wife he had put away because in 8 years she had borne him no son. Of his great lands that would go to his cousin, Philip of the Blackbeard, whom he hated. Of girls in the plain who wooed him with soft eyes and whom he passed by. Of a Jew who lay in a dungeon beneath the castle because of usury and other things. After a time he slept again, but lightly, for the sun came in through the deep, unshaded window and fell on his face and on the rushes that covered the floor. And in his sleep the grimness was gone, and the pride. And his mouth, which was sad, contended with the firmness of his chin. Clotilda went back to her bed and tucked her feet under her to warm them. In the next room her nurse lay on a bed asleep, with her mouth open. Outside in the stone corridor a page slept on a skin, with a corner over him against the draught. She thought things over while she warmed her feet. It was clear that singing did not soften all hearts. Perhaps she did not sing very well, but the bishop had said that after one had done a good act one might pray with hope. She decided to do a good act and then pray to see her mother. She would pray also to become a boy so that her father might care for her, but the bishop considered it a little late for such a prayer. She made terms with the Almighty, sitting on her bed. I shall do a good act, she said, on this the birthday of thy son, and after that I shall ask for the thing thou knowest of. After much thinking, she decided to free the Jew. And being, after all, her father's own child, she acted at once. It was a matter of many cold stone steps and much fumbling with bars. But Gwilym, the jailer, had crept up to the hall and lay sleeping by the fire, with a dozen dogs about him. It was the time of the Truce of God, and vigilance was relaxed. Also Gwilym was in love with a girl of the village, and there was talk that the seigneur, in his loneliness, had seen that she was beautiful. So Gwilym slept to forget, and the Jew lay awake because of rats and anxiety. The Jew rose from the floor when Clotilda threw the grating open, and blinked at her with weary and gentle eyes. It is the birthday of our Lord, said Clotilda, and I am doing a good deed so that I may see my mother again. But go quickly. Then she remembered something the bishop had said to her, and eyed him thoughtfully as he stared at her. But you do not love our Lord. The Jew put out his foot quietly so that she could not close the grating again, but he smiled into her eyes. Your Lord was a Jew, he said. This reassured her. It seemed to double the quality of mercy. She threw the door wide, and the usurer went out cautiously, as if suspecting a trap. But patches of sunlight, barred with black, showed the way clear. He should have gone at once, but he waited to give her the blessing of his people. Even then, having started, he went back to her. She looked so small in that fearsome place. If there is something you wish, little maid, and I can secure it for you." "I wish but two things," she said. "I wish to be a boy, only I fear it is too late for that. The bishop thinks so. And I wish to see my mother." And these being beyond his gift, and not contained in the pack he had fastened to his shoulders, he only shook his head and took his cautious way toward freedom. Having tried song and a good deed, Clotilda went back again to her room, stepping over the page who had curled himself up in a ball, like a puppy, and still asleep. She crossed her hands on her breast and raised her eyes as she had been taught. "Now, O Lord," she said, "I have tried song, and I have tried a good deed. I wish to see my mother." Perhaps it was merely coincidence that the level rays of the morning sun just then fell on the crucifix that hung on the wall, and that although during all the year it seemed to be of but wood and with closed eyes, now it flashed as with light, and the eyes were open. "He was one of your people," she said to the crucifix, "and by now he is down the hill." 2. Now it was the custom on the morning of the holy day for the seigneur to ride his finest stallion to the top of the hill, where led a steep road down to the town. There he dismounted, surrounded by his people, guests and soldiers, smaller visiting nobility, the household of the castle. And, the stage being set as it were, and the village waiting below, it was his pleasure to give his charger a great cut with the whip and send him galloping, unridden, down the hill. The horse was his who caught it. Below waited the villagers, divided between terror and cupidity. Above waited the castle folk. It was an amusing game for those who stood safely along the parapet and watched, one that convulsed them with merriment. Also, it improved the quality of those horses that grazed in the plain below. This year it was a great grey that carried Charles out to the road that clung to the face of the cliff. Behind him on a donkey, reminder of the humble beast that had borne the Christ into Jerusalem, rode the bishop. Saddled and bridled was the grey, with a fierce head and great shoulders, a strong beast for strong days. The men-at-arms were drawn up in a double line, weapons at rest. From the place below rose a thin grey smoke where the fire kindled for the steer. But the crowd had deserted and now stood, eyes upraised to the castle and to the cliff road where waited boys and men ready for their desperate emprise, clad in such protection of leather as they could afford against the stallion's hoofs. 2 people only remained by the steer, an aged man, almost blind, who tended the fire, and the girl Joan, whom Guillaume slept to forget. "The seigneur has ridden out from the gates, father," she said. The colour mounted to her dark cheeks. She was tall and slender, unlike the peasant girls of the town, almost noble in her bearing, a rare flower that Charles, in his rage and disappointment, would pick for himself. "And were you not undutiful," he mumbled, "you would be with him now, and looking down on this rabble." She did not reply at once. Her eyes were fixed on the frowning castle, on the grim double line of men-at-arms, at the massive horse and its massive rider. "I, too, should be up there," whined the old man. "Today, instead of delivering Christmas dues, I should be receiving them. But you," he swung on her malevolently, "you must turn great ox-eyes toward Guillaume, whose most courageous work is to levy tribute of a dungeon." She flushed. "I am afraid, father. He is a hard man." "He is gentle with women." "Gentle?" Her eyes were still upraised. "He knows not the word. When he looks at me there is no liking in his eyes. I am frightened." The overlord sat his great horse and surveyed the plain below. As far as he could see, and as far again in every direction, was his domain, paying him the tithe of fat cattle and heaping granaries. As far as he could see, and as far again, was the domain that, lacking a man-child, would go to Philip, his cousin. The bishop, who rode his donkey without a saddle, slipped off and stood beside the little beast on the road. His fingers absently traced the dark cross on its back. "Idiots! snarled the overlord out of his distemper, as he looked down into the faces of his faithful ones below. Fools, and sons of fools. Thy beast would suit them better, Bishop, than mine. Then he flung himself insolently out of the saddle. There was little of Christmas in his heart, God knows. Only hate and disappointment, and thwarted pride. A great day, my lord, said the bishop. Peace over the land, the end of a plentiful year. Bah! The end of a plentiful year, repeated the bishop tranquilly. This day of his birth, a day for thanksgiving and for goodwill. Bah! Said the overlord again, and struck the grey a heavy blow. So massive was the beast, so terrific the pace at which it charged down the hill, that the villagers scattered. He watched them with his lip curling. See, he said, brave men and true. Watch, father, how they rally to the charge. And when the creature was caught, and a swaying figure clung to the bridle, by the cross, the fool has him. A fine heritage from my cousin Philip, a village with its bravest man a simpleton. The fool held on swinging. His arms were very strong, and as is the way with fools and those that drown, many things went through his mind. The horse was his. He would go adventuring along the winter roads, adventuring and singing. The townspeople gathered about him with sheepish praise. From a dolt he had become a hero. Many have taken the same step in the same space of moments, the line being but a line and easy to cross. The denouement suited the grim mood of the overlord. It pleased him to see the smug villagers stand by while the fool mounted his steed. Side by side from the parapet, he and the bishop looked down into the town. The birthday of our Lord, Bishop, he said, with fools on blooded horses, and the courage of the townspeople in their stomachs. The birthday of our Lord, said the bishop tranquilly, with a lad mounted who has heretofore trudged afoot, and with the hungry fed in the marketplace. Now it had been in the mind of the bishop that the day would soften Charles's grim humour, and that he might speak to him as man to man, but Charles was not softened. So the bishop gathered up his courage. His hand was still on the cross on the donkey's back. You are young, my son, and have been grievously disappointed. I, who am old, have seen many things, and this I have learned. 2 things there are that, next to the love of God, must be greatest in a man's life. Not war, nor slothful peace, nor pride, nor yet a will that would bend all things to its end. The overlord scowled. He had found the girl Joan in the market square, and his eyes were on her. One, said the bishop, is the love of a woman. The other is a child. The donkey stood meekly, with hanging head. A woman, repeated the bishop. You grow rough up here on your hillside. Only a few months since the lady your wife went away, and already order has forsaken you. The child, your daughter, runs like a wild thing, without control. Our Holy Church deplores these things. Will Holy Church grant me another wife? Holy Church, replied the bishop gravely, would have you take back, my lord, the wife whom your hardness drove away. The seigneur's glance turned to the east, where lay the castle of Philip, his cousin. Then he dropped brooding eyes to the square below, where the girl Joan assisted her father by the fire, and moved like a mother of kings. You wish a woman for the castle, father, he said. Then a woman we shall have. Holy Church may not give me another wife, but I shall take one, and I shall have a son. The child Clotilda had watched it all from the window. Because she was very high, the thing she saw most plainly was the cross on the donkey's back. Far out over the plain was a moving figure which might or might not have been the Jew. She chose to think it was. One of your people, she said toward the crucifix. I have done a good deed. She was a little frightened, for all her high head. Other Christmases she and the lady her mother had sat hand in hand and listened to the roistering. "They are drunk," Clotilda would say, but her mother would stroke her hand and reply, "They but rejoice that our Lord is born." So the child Clotilda stood at her window and gazed to where the plain stretched as far as she could see and as far again. And there was her mother. She would go to her and bring her back, or perhaps failing that, she might be allowed to stay. Here no one would miss her. The odor of cooking food filled the great house. Loud laughter, the clatter of mug on board. Her old nurse was below, decorating a boar's head with berries and a crown. Because it was the Truce of God and a festival, the gates stood open. She reached the foot of the hill safely. Stragglers going up and down the steep way regarded her without suspicion. So she went through the square past the roasting steer, and by a twisting street into the open country. When she stopped to rest, it was to look back with wistful eyes toward the frowning castle on the cliff. For a divided allegiance was hers. Passionately as she loved her mother, her indomitable spirit was her father's heritage. His fierceness was her courage, and she loved him as the small may love the great. The fool found her at the edge of the river. She had forgotten that there was a river. He was on his great horse, and he rode up by the child and looked down at her. "It was I who captured him," he boasted. "The others ran, but I caught him, so." He dismounted to illustrate. "It is not because you were brave that you captured him." "Then why?" He stood with his feet wide apart, looking down at her. "It is because you have slept in a manger on a holy eve." "Aye," he responded, "but that was a matter of courage, too. There were many strange noises. Also, in the middle of the night came Our Lady herself and said to me, 'Hereafter thou shalt sing with the voice of an angel.'" "I should like to see Our Lady," said the child wistfully. "Also," pursued the fool, "she gave me power over great beasts. See, he fears me while he loves me." And indeed there seemed some curious kinship between the horse and the lad, perhaps because the barrier of keen human mind was not between them. "Think you," said the little maid, "if I slept where you did, she would appear to me? I would not ask much, only to be made a lad like you, and, perhaps, to sing." "But I am a simpleton. Instead of wit I have but a voice, and now a horse." "A lad like you," she persisted, "so that my father would love me, and my mother might come back again?" "Better stay as you are," said the fool. "Also, there will be no Holy Eve again for a long time. It comes but once a year. Also, it is hard for men who must either fight or work in the fields. He struck his chest, I shall do neither, and I shall cut no more wood. I go adventuring." Clotilda rose and drew her grey cloak around her. "I am adventuring, too," she said, "only I have no voice and no horse. May I go with you?" The boy was doubtful. He had that innate love and tenderness that is given to his kind instead of other things. But a child— "I will take you," he said at last, rather heavily. "But where, little lady?" "To my mother, at the castle of Black Philip." And when his face fell, for Philip was not named the Black only for his beard, "She loves singing. I will ask you to sing before her." That decided him. He took her before him on the grey horse, and they set off. Two valiant adventurers, a troubadour and a lady, without food or sufficient clothing, but with high courage and a song. And because it was the Truce of God, the children went unharmed, encountering no greater adventure than hunger and cold and aching muscles. Robbers skulked in their fastnesses, and their horses pawed the ground. Murder, rapine, and pillage slept that Christmas day under the shelter of the cross. The fool, who ached for adventure, rather resented the peace. "Wait until Monday," he said from behind her on the horse. "I shall show you great things." But the little maid was cold by that time, and beginning to be frightened. "Monday you may fight," she said. "Now I wish you would sing." So he sang until his voice cracked in his throat. Because it was Christmas, and because it was freshest in his heart, he sang mostly what he and the blacksmith and the crockery seller had sung in the castle yard. The light of light divine, true brightness undefiled, he bears for us the shame of sin, a holy, spotless child. They lay that night in a ruined barn with a roof of earth and stones. Clotilda eyed the manger wistfully, but the holy eve was past, and the day of miracles would not come for a year. Toward morning, however, she roused the boy with a touch. "She may have forgotten me," she said. "She has been gone since the spring. She may not love me now." "She will love you. It is the way of a mother to keep on loving." "I am still a girl." "You are still her child." Seeing that she trembled, he put his ragged cloak about her and talked to comfort her, although his muscles ached for sleep. He told her a fable of the countryside, of that abbot who, having duly served his God, died and appeared at the heavenly gates for admission. "A slave of the Lord," he replied, when asked his name, but he was refused. So he went away and labored 7 years again at good deeds and returned. "A servant of the Lord," he called himself, and again he was refused. Yet another 7 years he labored, and came in all humility to the gate. "A child of the Lord," said the abbot, who had gained both wisdom and humility, and the gates opened. 3. All that day came peasants up the hill with their Christmas dues, of 1 fowl out of 8, of barley and wheat. The courtyard had assumed the appearance of a great warehouse. Those that were prosperous came a-riding, hissing geese and chickens and grain in bags across the saddle. The poor trudged afoot. Among the latter came the girl Joan of the market square. She brought no grain, but fowls only, and of these but 2. She took the steep ascent like a thoroughbred, muscles working clean under glowing skin, her bosom rising evenly, treading like a queen among the clutter of peasants. And when she was brought into the great hall, her head went yet higher. It pleased the young seigneur to be gracious, but he eyed her much as he had eyed the great horse that morning before he cut it with the whip. She was but a means to an end. Such love and tenderness as were in him had gone out to the gentle wife he had put away from him, and had died of Clotilda. So Charles appraised her and found her, although but a means, very beautiful. Only the bishop turned away his head. "Joan," said Charles, "do you know why I have sent for you?" The girl looked down, but, although she quivered, it was not with fright. "I do, sire." Something of a sardonic smile played around the seigneur's mouth. The butterfly came too quietly to the net. "We are but gloomy folk here, rough soldiers and few women. It has been in my mind." Here he saw the bishop's averted head and scowled. What had been in his mind he forgot. He said, "I would have you come willingly, or not at all." At that she lifted her head and looked at him. "You know I will come," she said. "I can do nothing else. But I do not come willingly, my lord. You are asking too much." The bishop turned his head hopefully. "Why?" "You are a hard man, my lord." If she meant to anger him, she failed. They were not soft days. A man hid such tenderness as he had under grimness, and prayed in the churches for phlegm. "I am a fighting man. I have no gentle ways." Then a belated memory came to him. "I give no tenderness, and ask for none. But such kindness as you have, lavish on the child Clotilda. She is much alone." With the mention of Clotilda's name came a vision. Instead of the splendid peasant wench, he seemed to see the graceful and drooping figure of the woman he had put away because she had not borne him a son. He closed his eyes, and the girl, taking it for dismissal, went away. When he opened them, there were only fire and the dogs about it, and the bishop, who was preparing to depart. I shall not stay, my lord, said the bishop. The thing is desecration. No good can come from such a bond. It is Christmas and the Truce of God, and yet you do this evil thing. So the bishop went, muffled in a cloak, and mantled with displeasure. And with him, now that Clotilda had fled, went all that was good and open to the sun, from the grey castle of Charles the Fair. At evening Joan came again, still afoot, but now clad in her best. She came alone, and the men at the gates, instructed, let her in. She gazed around the courtyard with its burden of grain that had been crushed out of her people below, with its loitering soldiers and cackling fowls, and she shivered as the gates closed behind her. She was a good girl, as the times went, and she knew well that she had been brought up the hill as the stallion that morning had been driven down. She remembered the cut of the whip, and in the twilight of the courtyard she stretched out her arms toward the little town below, where the old man, her father, lived in semi-darkness, and where on that Christmas evening the women were gathered in the churches to pray. Having no seasonable merriment in himself, Charles surrounded himself that night with cheer. A band of wandering minstrels had arrived to sing. The great fire blazed. The dogs around it gnawed the bones of the Christmas feast. But when the troubadours would have sung of the Nativity, he bade them in a great voice to have done. So they sang of war, and, remembering his cousin Philip, his eyes blazed. When Joan came, he motioned her to a seat beside him, not on his right, but on his left, and there he let her sit without speech. But his mind was working busily. He would have a son, and the king would legitimize him. Then let Philip go hang. These lands of his, as far as the eye could reach, and as far again, would never go to him. The minstrels sang of war, and of his own great deeds, but there was no one of them with so beautiful a voice as that of the fool, who could sing only of peace, and the fool was missing. However, their songs soothed his hurt pride. This was he, these things he had done. If the bishop had not turned sour and gone, he would have heard what they sang. He might have understood, too, the craving of a man's warrior soul for a warrior son, for one to hold what he had gathered at such cost. Back always to this burning hope of his. Joan sat on his left hand, and went hot and cold, hot with shame, and cold with fear. So now, his own glory as a warrior commencing to pall on him, Charles would have more tribute, this time as Lord of Peace. He would celebrate this day of days, and at the same time throw a sop to Providence. He would release the Jew. The troubadours sang louder. Fresh liquor was passed about. Charles waited for the Jew to be brought. He remembered Clotilda then. She should see him do this noble thing. Since her mother had gone, she had shrunk from him. Now let her see how magnanimous he could be. He, the Seigneur, who held life and death in his hands, would this day give, not death, but life. Being not displeased with himself, he turned at last toward Joan and put a hand over hers. You see, he said, I am not so hard a man. By this Christian act shall I celebrate your arrival. But the Jew did not come. The singers learned the truth, and sang with watchful eyes. The Seigneur's anger was known to be mighty, to strike close at hand. Guillaume, the jailer, had been waiting for the summons. News had come to him late in the afternoon that had made him indifferent to his fate. The girl Joan, whom he loved, had come up the hill at the overlord's summons. So, instead of raising an alarm, Guillaume had waited sullenly. Death, which yesterday he would have blenched to behold, now beckoned him. When he was brought in, he stood with folded arms and asked no mercy. He is gone, my lord, said Guillaume, and waited. He did not glance at the girl. Gone, said Charles. Then he laughed such laughter as turned the girl cold. Gone, earth-clod? How now? Perhaps you, too, wish to give a hostage to fortune, to forestall me in mercy? He turned to the girl beside him. "You see," he said, "to what lengths the spirit of this holy day extends itself. Our friend here—" Then he saw her face and knew the truth. The smile set a little on his lips. "Why, then," he said to the jailer, "such mercy should have its reward." He turned to Joan. "What say you? Shall I station him at your door, sweet lady, as a guard of honour?" Things went merrily after that, for Gwilym drew a knife and made, not for the seigneur, but for Joan. The troubadours feared to stop singing without a signal, so they sang through white lips. The dogs gnawed at their bones, and the seigneur sat and smiled, showing his teeth. Gwilym, finally unhanded, stood with folded arms and waited for death. "This is the time of the Truce of God," said the seigneur softly, and, knowing that death would be a boon, sent him off unhurt. The village, which had eaten full, slept early that night. Down the hill at 9 o'clock came 6 men at arms on horseback and clattering through the streets. Word went about quickly. Great oaken doors were unbarred to the news. "The child Clotilda is gone," they cried through the streets. "Up and arm! The child Clotilda is gone!" Joan, deserted, sat alone in the great hall, for the seigneur was off, riding like a madman. Flying through the market square, he took the remains of the great fire at a leap. He had but one thought. The Jew had stolen the child. Therefore, to find the Jew. In the blackest of the night he found him, sitting by the road, bent over his staff. The eyes he raised to Charles were haggard and weary. Charles reined his horse back on his haunches, his men-at-arms behind him. "What have you done with the child?" "The child—" "Out with it!" cried Charles, and flung himself from his horse. If the Jew were haggard, Charles was more so, hard-bitten of terror, pallid to the lips. "I have seen no child. That is—" He hastened to correct himself, seeing Charles's face in the light of a torch. "I was released by a child, a girl. I have not seen her since." He spoke with the simplicity of truth. In the light of the torches, Charles's face went white. "She released you?" he repeated slowly. "What did she say?" "She said, 'It is the birthday of our Lord,'" repeated the Jew, slowly out of his weary brain. "And I am doing a good deed." "Is that all?" The Jew hesitated. "Also she said, 'But you do not love our Lord.'" Charles swore under his breath. "And you?" "I said but little. "What did you say?"
I said that her Lord was also a Jew." He was fearful of giving offense, so he hastened to add, "It was by way of comforting the child. Only that, my lord."
"She said nothing else?"
The seigneur's voice was dangerously calm. The Jew faltered. He knew the gossip of the town. She said she wished 2 things, my lord. To become a boy and to see her mother." Then Charles lifted his face to where the stars were growing dim before the uprising of the dawn, and where, as far away as the eye could reach, and as far again, lay the castle of his cousin Philip of the black beard. And the rage was gone out of his eyes. For suddenly he knew that, on that feast of mother and child, Clotilda had gone to her mother, as unerringly as an arrow to its mark. And with the rage died all the passion and pride. In the eyes that had gazed at Joan over the parapet, and that now turned to the east, there was reflected the dawning of a new day. The castle of Philip the Black lay in a plain. For as much as a mile in every direction the forest had been sacrificed against the loving advances of his cousin Charles. Also about the castle was a moat in which swam noisy geese and much litter. When, shortly after dawn, the sentry at the drawbridge saw a great horse with a double burden crossing the open space, he was but faintly interested. A belated peasant with his Christmas dues, perhaps. But when, on the lifting of the morning haze,
He saw that the horse bore 2 children, and one a girl. He called another man to look. Troubadours, by sound, said the newcomer, for the fool was singing to cheer his lack of breakfast. Coming empty of belly, as come all troubadours. But the sentry was dubious. Minstrels were a slothful lot, adverse to the chill of early morning. And when the pair came nearer and drew up beyond the moat, the soldiers were still at a loss. The fool's wandering eyes and tender mouth bespoke him no troubadour, and the child rode with him head high like a princess. "I have come to see my mother," Clotilda called, and demanded admission, clearly. Here were no warriors, but a fool and a child. So they let down the bridge and admitted the pair, but they raised the bridge at once again against the loving advances of Philip's cousin Charles. But once in the courtyard, Clotilda's courage began to fail her. Would her mother want her? Prayer had been unavailing, and she was still a girl, and, at first, it seemed as though her fears had been justified, although they took her into the castle kindly enough, and offered her food which she could not eat, and plied her with questions which she could not answer. "I want my mother," was the only thing they could get out of her. Her little body was taut as a bowstring, her lips tight. They offered her excuses. The lady mother slept. Now she was rising and must be clothed. And then at last they told her, because of the haunted look in her eyes. "She is ill," they said. "Wait but a little, and you shall see her." Deadly despair had Clotilda in its grasp with that announcement. These strange folk were gentle enough with her, but never before had her mother refused her the haven of her outheld arms. Besides, they lied. Their eyes were shifty. She could see in their faces that they kept something from her. Philip, having confessed himself overnight, by candlelight, was at Mass when the pair arrived. 3 days one must rot of peace, and those 3 days, to be not entirely lost, he prayed for success against Charles, and for another thing that lay close to his heart, but not for both together, since that was not possible. He knelt stiffly in his cold chapel and made his supplications, but he was not too engrossed to hear the drawbridge chains and to pick up his ears to the clatter of the grey horse. So, having been communicated, he made short shift of what remained to be done, and got to his feet. The abbot, whose offices were finished, had also heard the drawbridge chains, and let him go. When Philip saw Clotilda, he frowned, and then smiled. He had sons, but no daughter, and he would have set her on his shoulder, but she drew away haughtily. So Philip sat in a chair and watched her with a curious smile playing about his lips. Surely it were enough to make him smile, that he should play host to the wife and daughter of his cousin Charles. Because of that, and of the thing that he had prayed for, and with a twinkle in his eyes, Black Philip alternately watched the child, and from a window the plain which was prepared against his cousin. And, as he had expected, at 10 o'clock in the morning came Charles and 6 men-at-arms, riding like demons, and jerked up their horses at the edge of the moat. Philip, still with the smile under his black beard, went out to greet them. "Well met, cousin," he called. "You ride fast and early." Charles eyed him with feverish eyes. "Truce of God," he said, sulkily, from across the moat. And then, "We seek a runaway, the child Clotilda." "I shall make inquiry," said Philip, veiling the twinkle under his heavy brow. "In such a season many come and go." But in his eyes Charles read the truth, and breathed with freer breath. They lowered the drawbridge again with a great creaking of windlass and chain, and Charles with his head up rode across. But his men-at-arms stood their horses squarely on the bridge so that it could not be raised, and Philip smiled into his beard. Charles dismounted stiffly. He had been a night in the saddle, and his horse staggered with fatigue. In Philip's courtyard, as in his own, were piled high the Christmas tithes. "A good year," said Philip agreeably, and indicated the dues. "Peaceful times, eh, cousin?" But Charles only turned to see that his men kept the drawbridge open, and followed him into the house. Once inside, however, he turned on Philip fiercely. "I am not here out of my own desire. It appears that both my wife and child find sanctuary with you." "Tut," said Philip good-naturedly. "It is the Christmas season, man, and a Sunday. We will not quarrel as to the why of your coming." "Where is she?" "Your wife or Clotilda?" Now all through the early morning Charles had longed for one as for the other, but there was nothing of that in his voice. "Clotilda," he said. "I shall make inquiry if she has arrived," mumbled Philip into his beard, and went away. So it came about that Charles was alone when he saw the child, and caught her up in his hungry arms. As for Clotilda, her fear died at once in his embrace. When Philip returned he found them thus, and coughed discreetly. So Charles released the child and put her on her feet. "I have," said Philip, "another member of your family under my roof, as to whom you have made no inquiry." "I have secured that for which I came," said Charles haughtily. But his eyes were on Philip, and a question was in them. Philip, however, was not minded to play Charles's game, but his own, and that not too fast. "In that event, cousin," he replied, "let the little maid eat, and then take her away. And since it is a Sunday, and the Truce of God, we can drink to the Christmas season. Even quarrelling dogs have intervals of peace." So, perforce, because the question was still in his heart, if not in his eyes, Charles drank with his cousin and enemy Philip. But with his hand in that small hand of Clotilda's, which was so like her mother's. Philip's expansiveness extended itself to the men-at-arms, who still sat woodenly on the drawbridge. He sent them hot liquor, for the day was cold, and at such intervals as Charles's questioning eyes were turned away, he rubbed his hands together furtively, as a man with a secret. "A prosperous year," said Philip. Charles grunted. "We shall have snow before night," said Philip. "Huh," said Charles, and glanced toward the sky, but made no move to go. "The child is growing." To this Charles made no reply whatever, and Philip bleated on. "Her mother's body," he said, "but your eyes and hair, cousin." Charles could stand no more. He pushed the child away and rose to his feet. Philip, to give him no tithe of advantage, rose too. "Now," said Charles squarely, "where is my wife? Is she hiding from me?" Then Philip's face must grow very grave, and his mouth set in sad lines. "She is ill, Charles. I would have told you sooner, but you lacked interest." Charles swallowed to steady his voice. "How ill?" "A short and violent illness," said Philip. "All of last night the women have been with her, and this morning—" He glanced toward the window. "I was right, as you see, cousin. It is snowing." Charles clutched him by the arm and jerked him about. "What about this morning?" he roared. "Snow on Christmas," mused Philip, "prophesies another prosperous year." Then, having run his quarry to earth, he showed mercy. "Would you like to see her?" Charles swallowed again, this time his pride. "I doubt if she cares to see me." "Probably not," said Philip. "Still a few words. She is a true woman, and kindly. Also, it is a magnanimous season. But you must tread softly, and speak fair. This is no time for a high hand." Charles, perforce, must promise mildness. He made the concession with poor grace, but he made it. And in Philip's eyes grew a new admiration for this hulking cousin and enemy, who ate his pride for a woman. At the entrance to an upper room where hung a leather curtain, he stood aside. "Softly," he said through his beard. "No harsh words. Send the child in first." So Philip went ponderously away and left Charles to cool his heels and wait. As he stood there sheepishly, he remembered many things with shame. Joan, and the violence of the last months, and the bishop's averted head. For now he knew one thing, and knew it well. The lady of his heart lay in that quiet room beyond, and the devils that had fought in him were dead of a Christmas peace. Little cries came to him, Clotilda's soft weeping, and another voice that thrilled him, filled with the wooing note that is in a mother's voice when she speaks to her child. But it was a feeble voice, and its weakness struck terror to his soul. What was this thing for which he had cast her away, now that he might lose her? His world shook under his feet. His cousin and enemy was, willy-nilly, become his friend. His world, which he had thought was his own domain, as far from his castle as the eye could reach, and as far again, was in an upper room of Philip's house, and dying, perhaps. But she was not dying. They admitted him in time to save his pride, for he was close to distraction, and, being admitted, he saw only the woman he had put away. He went straight to his wife's bed and dropped on his knees beside it. Not for his life could he have spoken then. Inarticulate things were in his mind, remorse and the loneliness of the last months, and the shame of the girl Joan. He caught her hand to him and covered it with kisses. "I have tried to live without you," he said, "and death itself were better." When she did not reply, but lay back, white to the lips, he rose and looked down at her. "I can see," he said, "that my touch is bitterness. I've merited nothing better. So I shall go again, but this time, if it will comfort you, I shall give you the child Clotilda. Not that I love her the less, but that you deserve her the more." Then she opened her eyes, and what he saw there brought him back to his knees with a cry. "I want only your love, my lord, to make me happy," she said. "And now, see how the birthday of our Lord has brought us peace." She drew down the covering a trifle, close to his bent head, and showed him the warm curve of her arm. "Unto us also is born a son, Charles." "I have wanted a son," said Charles the Fair. "But more than a son I have wanted you, heart of my heart." Outside in the courtyard, the fool had drawn a circle about him. "I am adventuring," he said. "Yesterday I caught this horse when the others ran from him. Then I saved a lady and brought her to her destination. This being the Christmas season and a Sunday, I shall rest here for a day." He threw out his chest magnificently. "But tomorrow I continue on my way." "Can you fight?" they baited him. "I can sing," he replied, and he threw back his head with its wandering eyes and tender mouth, and sang, "The light of light divine, true brightness undefiled. He bears for us the shame of sin, a holy, spotless child." End of The Truce of God.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy what we do at CraftLit and want to listen to more of our audio, feel free to visit us at our Gumroad shop and check out all our premium annotated books. Charles Dickens's Bleak House, for example, has more than 40 hours worth of annotated audiobook. We are not joking. If this is something you're interested in, go to craftlit.gumroad.com. That's CraftLit.gumroad, GUM as in Mary, ROAD as in dog.com to access our premium books or buy them as a gift. If you enjoy what we do here on CraftLit, please don't forget to like and subscribe on iTunes. Give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button on YouTube. You can also support the show by subscribing to the CraftLit App Premium feed. You can check the link below for details. Your support helps keep CraftLit going strong, and we've got plenty of ways for you to get involved now. If you want more perks, you can head over to Patreon at patreon.com/CraftLit and become a patron of this art. You can also join our YouTube channel memberships for access to tons of premium books as bonuses, or you can support us at ko-fi.com/craftlit. And guess what? We've just relaunched our premium memberships over on craftlit.com. Go to craftlit.com/premium and check out all of the details there Link is below as well. For a one-stop shop to all things CraftLit, please visit Linktree at linktr.ee/CraftLit channel. This is your go-to hub for all of our social media and more. They're all listed there for you. And I keep forgetting to mention, come join our Facebook group. It is full of the kindest, most creative makers and readers, and even some people who never really used to read. We've got them now. All right, that's it for now. Thank you. Take care of yourself. Have a great one, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.